that we need to take up before we bring jurors in?
Your Honor, I just would ask to call a witness out of order briefly. It's Dr. Brian Bolton is here from Wake Med. He's rearranged his surgical schedule for us this morning. If we can go ahead and call him, and then I'll recall Agent Louder to the stand.
That'll be fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome back. We're now, I believe, going to take a witness out of order for the state due to a scheduling issue, and then Agent Louder will be recalled to continue with direct examination of her. So I believe Mr. Waller.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Your Honor, at this time the state would ask to call Dr. Brian Bolton.
If you would please stand, place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Waller.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Bolton, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Will you please state your name for the record?
Brian James Bolton.
And Dr. Bolton, how are you employed?
I'm employed as a cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon over at Wake Med.
How long have you been employed as a physician in that capacity at Wake Med?
Since July of 2012.
And prior to joining Wake Med practice in 2012, any previous surgery experience in terms of post-residency?
I did a post-residency. I did a cardiothoracic surgical fellowship at Emory in Atlanta, and then completed that in June of 2012 and took my first job at Wake Med.
Okay. And could you tell us a little bit about your education background in terms of your medical school and residency programs and so forth?
So I attended medical school at the University of Cincinnati. Upon completion of that, I did a year internship at the University of Colorado, and then completed a general surgical training at University of Cincinnati. That was a combined 7 years after medical school, and then completed a 3-year cardiothoracic surgical fellowship at Emory.
And can you tell us a little bit about what it entails to be a cardiovascular surgeon?
Technically, I'm a board-certified thoracic surgeon, so I'm trained in all aspects of the surgical management of disease within the chest, and I have tailored my practice specifically within the management of cardiovascular diseases. So daily I perform open heart surgeries on the heart as well as the great vessels in the chest, such as the aorta or the pulmonary vessels.
And are you currently hold a license to practice medicine here in the state of North Carolina?
I do.
And back on April 10th of 2014, did you also hold a license to practice medicine here in the state of North Carolina?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Bolton, did you have, or excuse me, let me ask this question. Do you have the opportunity to become involved in trauma cases there at Wake Med?
Upon request from the trauma team.
Okay. And how can you be notified by the trauma team that they have a case that they need your consultation on?
Many of them have my cell phone number and also carry a pager.
And are you part of a specific trauma team, or is it on a case-by-case basis that you're needed?
A case-by-case basis.
And sir, did you have the opportunity back on April 10th of 2014 to come into contact with the victim in this case, at that time, LaTanya Holden?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell the members of the jury a little bit about how you got involved with the case?
I was called by both the anesthesia staff, the trauma surgeon of record, as well as notified by the operating room control desk that the trauma team was taking a victim of penetrating trauma, a gunshot wound to the chest, emergently to the operating room, and they were very concerned about an injury to the heart or major vessels of the chest and requested my presence immediately.
And as part of your practice, do you often treat gunshot wounds to the chest or heart area?
If they ever survive to get to the operating room.
Okay. And Dr. Bolton, have you reviewed the medical records of Ms. Holden and prepared to give your testimony here today regarding the treatment of her?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to tender Dr. Bolton in the area of cardiovascular thoracic surgery.
Any objection?
No, sir.
His testimony will be received as proffered.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Bolton, I believe you said you were at home when you received this trauma alert. Do you recall kind of what your reaction was and how you were, if you were able to get to the hospital in a timely manner?
Absolutely. This is the first time I ever recall receiving 3 pages simultaneously around the same person, so I did not bother returning them, just got in my car, started driving, and returned the phone call at that time.
And you mentioned one of the general surgeons contacted you. Do you recall if it was Dr. Lilly that contacted you?
Yes, it was.
When you arrived there at Wake Med, what was the condition of LaTanya at that point?
At that point, she was in the operating room, and Dr. Lilly was about to initiate her, or basically start her portion of the operation. We discussed an operative strategy.
And as part of that operative strategy, did you review x-rays and CAT scans of LaTanya?
We reviewed a CAT scan together and then basically discussed that while she did have an entrance wound or a bullet hole, we couldn't tell if it was entrance or exit, but basically an a bullet hole at this location above near her heart, that if it would have penetrated her heart, most likely she would have died at the scene, and that the best operative strategy, as it was what we refer to as a thoracoabdominal injury, where it goes from the chest through the diaphragm into the belly, that the best strategy would be to open the belly first to make sure that there was no sites of ongoing active bleeding, temporize those, and then I would directly open the chest after that.
And was LaTanya sedated at this time when
she was under a general anesthetic, yes.
When you became involved in the case?
Correct. I did not have the chance to meet her nor speak with her prior to the initiation of general anesthesia.
And prior to the surgery itself, in reviewing the CAT scan, were you able to tell the general path that the bullet took through?
A rough idea, yes. You can kind of usually identify sites of entry and or exit, and or if there's only one entrance wound, you can generally draw a linear line between the entrance wound and the location of the bullet, have a rough idea of the organs involved.
And you may have said this already, but were you aware if there was an exit wound on LaTanya?
I do not recall.
Okay. Once you reviewed the CAT scan, is that the point in which y'all opened Latanya up to do the surgery.
Well, she obtained the CAT scan in the emergency room and was brought then straight from there to the operating room. So the decision was already made to take her to the operating room prior to my involvement. And so in essence, this was an emergent or urgent intraoperative consult.
And you mentioned the term emergent. Like, what were the signs or the conditions that this was an emergency that you knew you need to act quickly on?
Basically, by definition, a penetrating injury to the chest, basically between the nipples and below the collarbone, is by definition kind of an emergency.
What happened once y'all actually got Latanya into the operating room?
The sequence of events where Dr. Lilly opened the abdomen, did not find any major sites of life-threatening bleeding. You can refer to her details at that time, her testimony and operative report at that time. After that, I opened up her chest, and inside the chest cage, the heart sits inside of a very tough sac called the pericardial sac. It's very tough like leather. And then I opened up the pericardial sac. When Dr. Lilly had opened up the belly, we were able to examine the site that it exited the pericardial sac through the diaphragm, and saw a little bit of blood coming through that. But when I opened up the pericardium in the front of her chest, I was able to visualize the exact injury to her heart.
Let me ask you a few questions about that. You say you actually had to open up her chest. What is that procedure called?
It's called a median sternotomy, is the medical term. That's done with a surgical saw. Something we routinely do on pretty much every open heart surgery case.
So her chest bone or
breastbone would be divided in half, yes.
And at that point, it sounded like did you actually see an injury to the pericardial sac?
I saw a hole, yes.
Okay. And I think you said it looked like that the bullet or the projectile had gone through the pericardial sac and then gone.
It had obviously entered the pericardial sac. When Dr. Lilly had opened the abdomen before, we could see the site that had exited through the diaphragm. And so, like I mentioned, we visualized some blood exiting that site.
Was she actively bleeding at this time, doctor?
Not from the heart.
Not from the heart. From the other?
Oh, I should say she had some very small vessel injuries to the muscle itself that was bleeding, but there was not a penetrating hole in the heart.
Okay. All right. So at this point, do you actually have to open up the pericardial sac to get to the heart?
Yes. So I opened up the pericardial sac and visualized the injury to her heart. As I described it in my operative report, it was like a small canyon had been carved out of the surface of her ventricle. An analogy I would use is it's like opening up a fresh box of ice cream and your first spoon, you scrape across the top, and so that's basically what it looked like, where there's this canyon carved out of the top of her heart, which the right ventricle is what sits kind of at the top. I would refer to that as a top, but more we use the medical term anterior, meaning most in the front, posterior being most in the back. So it's the more anterior portion at the site that it entered, and the canyon, so to speak, was about almost a centimeter deep, a centimeter wide, and several centimeters long.
When you saw this injury to the heart itself, I mean, the ventricle is part of the heart itself.
Correct. It's one of the four chambers.
When you saw this injury to the ventricle, what was your concern at that point?
The concern would be that if this was unrepaired, that she could rupture at that site, or over time develop an aneurysm, which is the medical term for a dilated portion, and that would kind of start to decrease the overall function of her heart.
And so, Dr. Bolton, there wasn't a hole in her heart from the bullet, but as you kind of described, the bullet nicked or grazed this ventricle.
Correct.
If the bullet had penetrated the ventricle or any other chamber of the heart, what would have been the result?
It would have been a lethal injury.
And would she have even made it to Wake Med?
No.
Now, after the bullet, I guess, kind of nicks the ventricle, then it passes through the pericardial sac.
Correct.
And then into the diaphragm.
Correct. And both Dr. Lilly and myself remarked that, in essence, if we had taken a laser pointer and connected the entrance hole to the pericardial sac and the exit hole to the pericardial sac, it was nothing shy of a miracle that she was alive. It did not make sense how that bullet did not penetrate her heart.
And what did you do to repair the injuries that you saw there?
A very standard repair to any kind of laceration to the ventricle, just with some Teflon pledgeted suture. Teflon pledget is basically a material because the muscle itself doesn't hold stitches, so it just helps to reinforce the stitch itself.
And were you able to successfully complete that procedure?
Absolutely.
Were any complications with repairing the ventricle?
No.
Okay. And then how about the pericardial sac? Did you repair that as well?
There's no need to repair that individual hole, but we routinely close it at the end of the operation.
Okay, so essentially stitch it shut as well. Okay. And then do you close the chest cavity back together?
Correct, and we put the breastbone back together with stainless steel wires that they fixate in place while it heals like any other broken bone.
And at that point, Dr. Bolton, is your part in the procedure essentially over at that point?
Correct.
And then you turned it back over to Dr. Lilly to let
Correct.
her.
So then I completed closing the chest. Dr. Lilly completed her portion of the operation and closed the abdomen. And then together we helped manage her while she was in the hospital, and then Dr. Lilly managed the primary aspects of her follow-up before she no longer required our care.
How long would you say your heart procedure itself took, Dr. Bolton?
Hour and a half.
And after the procedure were over and the follow-up care was turned over to you and Dr. Lilly, do you recall if LaTanya had any complications whatsoever?
No significant complications.
Did you ever have to see her after she left the hospital a few days later?
No, she did not return for anything other than routine visit.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bolton. I don't have any further questions at this time.
No questions.
Thank you. You may step down, sir.
Thank you.
All right, it's my understanding you're going to recall Agent Louder.
Louder, yes, sir. We'd recall Agent Louder at this time.
And ma'am, you recognize you're still under oath?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Wiley?
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Louder, good morning.
Good morning.
All right. No, we had a long day yesterday, and just a few more issues to cover with you, and we'll be we'll be done. I believe when we broke yesterday, we had talked a little bit about what you did on April 14th and April 15th of 2014.
Yes, sir.
Can you just kind of remind us all of the different things that you processed and went through on April 14th and April 15th?
Sure. During that 2-day span, I collected clothing from the defendant from the Wake County Sheriff's Department. I also processed those items for areas of potential blood. I also went back to the residence at 1125 Lake Ladd Road to see if we could find any more spent shell casings, where we were able to locate 2 more. Then I also processed the firearm for potential blood and also DNA.
Okay. So those were the clothes that we talked about yesterday, and the bullets that we talked about yesterday, and you saw the firearm again.
Yes, sir.
Now, Agent Louder, tell us a little bit about once your agency, CCBI, gets finished with your part of the processing, where do different items of evidence go? Do they stay there with you, or do you send them out to different places?
They don't stay, not all evidence stays at CCBI. In our facilities, we process basically from crime scenes the latent evidence. So the latent evidence stayed in our facility. All other evidence was either sent back to the agency that was in charge of the investigation, which would be the Wake County Sheriff's Department, or it was sent for further analysis to the State Crime Lab.
And when you say latent evidence, is that referring to the fingerprints?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so CCBI itself can process the fingerprints and tell whether or not there's a match or something like that,
Yes, sir.
if an identification is made.
Yes, sir.
And do you do that yourself, Agent Louder?
No, I don't.
Okay. Is it sent on to someone else?
We have a latent division in our facility that does that.
And then I think you said you can also send the evidence back to Wake County Sheriff's Office for them to maintain custody of at that point.
Yes, sir.
And then other evidence can be sent to SBI or the State Crime Lab.
Yes, sir.
Hey, can you tell us a little bit about how items of evidence are sent to the State Crime Lab or SBI?
The items are after the investigation is complete, for the most part. I talk to the Sheriff's Department or the agency who is responsible for this case. So in this case, it was the Sheriff's Department. We determined that there were several items that we were of interest.
Agent Louder, I'm approaching you with what has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 246. If you can take a look at that document and tell me if you recognize what that document is.
Yes, sir. It's
What is that?
SBI 5 form that I fill out. It's basically requesting what item and what further processing it needs to be done with it.
And we'll start by, well, first of all, let's talk about that form a little bit. Does that form appear to be in the same or substantially same condition as when you created it?
Yes, sir.
All right. And does it list the different items of evidence that you requested to be sent to the State Bureau of Identification for further examination?
Yes, sir.
And does it have your name as the requesting officer and also have the CCBI file number that is identified with this case?
In this case, it has the CCBI case number is handwritten on it. We use the Wake County Sheriff's Department, their case number for the SBI form.
And what was the Wake County Sheriff's Office number that was used?
14-009962.
Okay. And what was the CCBI number that was used?
14-002067.
And Agent Thompson, Agent Louder, does this form appear to be in the same or substantially same condition as when you created it?
Yes, sir.
And do you physically send the this form over yourself, or does someone else in your office actually fax or send this to the SBI?
This form, along with the evidence, is taken, as earlier I talked about our evidence technician. So the process in which these items go is similar to my secure evidence locker. We have secured evidence lockers at our CCBI facilities. So the items that I wanted to be submitted were placed in a secure evidence locker, meaning they were placed in that locker, it was then locked. Our evidence technician is the only one who has the ability to access that, except for also some administration. Along with the evidence, the SBI form was placed in there. She then submits the form exactly the way that I typed it up electronically to the SBI.
And the SBI 5 form that you have there in front of you, does it list the victims as Anglia Taylor, Sylvester Taylor, LaTanya Holden, and then the suspect as Nathan Holden?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 246 into evidence.
No objection.
It's allowed.
Now, in reviewing that document, Agent Louder, can you tell the members of the jury what items that you actually sent over to the SBI, and as you're doing so, what type of examination that you're requesting? And before we do that, is the SBI capable of doing different types of analysis to your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
What are some different types of analysis that they can do?
They can test the firearm, so they can examine the firearm. Also, any spent shell casings or projectiles that were collected, they can use those items to compare to the firearms, so we consider that firearms or ballistics. They also do DNA, where they'll examine specific items for persons of interest DNA.
And were those two of the types of analysis that you requested in this case?
Yes, sir.
And those are procedures that the CCBI agency just doesn't have the capability of doing at this time?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right, thank you. All right, if you can, again, kind of list your agency item number, the description of the evidence, and then what type of exam you asked for.
I submitted item number 13, 14, 15, and 16. Those items were all the golden color cement shell casings, head stamped 380 Win Auto. So those were sent to the SBI for ballistics or firearm examination.
Okay.
The next item was number 17, which was a copper and color projectile, and if you can recall, that was the one that was located at the scene. That again was that was submitted for the firearms division at the SBI. I also submitted 22 and 23, which were one golden color spent shell casing, head stamped Win 380 Auto. And if you recall, those were the two items that were located when I went back out to the residence. One was located in what we believe to be the children's bedroom, and one was located on the exterior, the rear yard of the residence.
Actually, Agent, are those the ones that were found by Agent Ferran at Holden Acres?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry about that. Yep.
So Agent Ferran, who testified yesterday, items 22 and 23, those were the shell casings
Yes.
that she found out in the field?
Yes, sorry.
That's fine. And Agent Ferran would have turned those over to you as the lead case agent, though?
Yes,
Okay, all right. And you sent those off for ballistics testing as well?
that's correct.
All right. Now, okay, the next two items that you sent?
Item number 30, which was a black and color magazine containing 4 golden color live rounds, head stamped Win 380 Auto. That was sent for the ballistics or firearms unit. Also, item number 31, it was one black and silver in color model CF380, serial number P807107. The firearm was, those two items were also collected by Agent Ferran, which were signed over to me. The firearm was submitted to the SBI for possible DNA as well as the firearms unit.
And those were recovered at the Holden Acres address?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you say the firearm, we're talking about that 380 gun that we saw yesterday?
Yes, sir.
All right. What was the next items you sent?
The item was item number 53. It was one blood card from Angelia Taylor, and that was submitted to the DNA unit. Item number 56 was one bullet from the chest of Sylvester Taylor. That was submitted to the firearms unit. Item number 57, one bullet from the right arm of Sylvester Taylor, again to the firearms unit. Item number 69, one golden color Win 380 Auto spent shell casing. And item number 70, which was one golden color Win 380 spent shell casing. Those were the two that were located when I went back to the residence. Those were also submitted for the firearms unit. Items number 74, it was the black and color Timberland right boot, size 7 medium. The item number 73 was the Timberland left boot, size 7 medium. Those were sent to the DNA unit. Item number 76, one black and color Nike brand hoodie, size medium. Again, that was sent to the DNA unit. I also submitted items number 99 and 100. Item number 99 was a DNA swab from LaTanya Holden, and 100 was a DNA swab from Nathan Holden.
And why do you submit DNA swabs to the SBI?
In this case, we needed all victims and potential suspect DNA to be ruled out or to be compared to. So you will notice that the items that I submitted were every single victim's DNA as well as the suspect DNA.
So you've got the suspect's DNA is item 100, a DNA swab from Nathan Holden. 99 is a DNA swab from the victim, LaTanya Holden. And then with those blood cards that you've described earlier, would they contain a DNA sample for Sylvester Taylor and Anglia Taylor?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. And then a few more items you submitted?
Yes, sir. I submitted item number 75, which was the pair of Levi Strauss brand jeans, size 31 by 30. Those were submitted to the DNA unit. Item number 101, which was a bullet from A. Taylor. that was sent to the firearm unit, and then 102, which was a blood card from S. Taylor.
Now, Agent Louder, obviously yesterday we spent a lot of time looking at close to 100 pieces of evidence. Why didn't you send all 100 pieces of evidence over to SBI for further processing?
There are a multitude of reasons why I don't send 100 pieces of evidence. In this case, I had well over 100 pieces of evidence. Some items, basically, when I'm going about deciding what's going to be tested further, I'm trying to form a forensic relationship between the victim and the defendant. So I'm thinking about specific items that I've collected and what is more pertinent. So I know that I have suspect's clothing that I tested and I was able to find blood on it. So we want to be able to later identify that blood. That's why those specific items were further sent to the SBI for analysis.
And yesterday you talked about specifically in regards to the defendant's clothing. Well, we'll take the Nike hoodie for example. That you actually did swabs on the Nike hoodie, and it had, I guess, presumptive indications of blood. Why did you make the decision to send the hoodie itself versus, I guess, the swabs that you would have taken?
If I just send the swab over, it gives them a limited resource. If I send them an entire item, they're able to look at that specific item in multiple areas other than just the area that I collected. So they might find blood in different areas than I was able to see based off of some techniques that they use in the lab.
And so is that, in talking about the Timberland boots, the Nike hoodie, the defendant's jeans, was that kind of the thought process you went through on each one of those items, that you had a swab but thought it was better to send them the entire article of clothing for them to do further analysis on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then also, in kind of talking and going through the evidence yesterday, there were a couple of photographs of blood on the walls, and then I think there was a picture of some blood on the deck. Did you send those blood swabs off to SBI?
No, I didn't. Based upon the investigation, we were told that the incident between LaTanya and the suspect occurred in the hallway of the residence. So the area where we saw previously the blood on the walls, the carpet, and the area where I took that swab from, I believe it was the living room floor. So I was under the indication that, actually we had been under the indication that the suspect had no injuries at this time, so there was no indication that he was bleeding at the time of the scene. So based off of the hallway, we were under the impression that that was LaTanya's blood. And if you think about the porch, we knew that a suspect who had been injured by a gunshot wound fled through the rear entry door. We also knew that LaTanya was taken out of the back door on a stretcher and she was bleeding at the time. So we believed that the blood on the porch could either be from LaTanya or Mr. Taylor. Again, we were never given any indication that the suspect was bleeding at the time of the incident.
And then also, kind of similarly, you also mentioned some of the things about the truck, but maybe there were some blood swabs that y'all took off the truck. Did you decide to send those over?
We chose not to send those over. We talked about yesterday about how I examined that vehicle with Blue Star. So there was a reaction in that car, but the reaction was a very limited reaction. When you have a large presence of blood, it immediately lights up, and it's going to be a strong luminescence. This one, it lit up, but it was a very light luminescence. So we did collect those areas, and it could have been tested further if an agency wished, but at the time we found that testing the suspect's clothing was the stronger option.
And yesterday we talked about this a little bit, but the processing that you did to these different items of evidence that were eventually sent to SBI, whether it was the gun or clothing, did any of the swabs or any of your processing in general do anything to disturb those items of evidence where they wouldn't be able to be processed by SBI?
No, sir.
And you mentioned that part of what you sent over were 2 DNA swabs from LaTanya Holden and Nathan Holden.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that right? Did you obtain those swabs yourself?
No, sir, I didn't. I got them from the sheriff's department.
Do you recall which agents brought them to you?
I believe I met Investigator Blackwell at the sheriff's department to receive them from him.
And Investigator Blackwell, was he the gentleman here behind me that you knew to be the lead agent in the case?
Yes, sir.
From the Wake County Sheriff's Office perspective?
Yes, sir.
May I approach you?
Yes.
Agent Louder, I'm going to hand you what has been marked for identification purposes as 239 and 240. If you'll take a look at those two items, and again, as we did yesterday, identify the CCBI item number and the description for each one of those.
Item number, States Exhibit 239 is my item number 99, and that's DNA swabs from Latanya Holding. Again, my case information, the Wake County case number is on here, the victim's name, the address that I collected it from, my initials, and I had also sealed it. Or I'm sorry, I didn't seal it. It was already sealed to me when I got it.
And then State's Exhibit number 240, if you can identify that for us.
It's my item number 100, and that's DNA swabs from Nathan Holden. Again, CCBI case number, Wake County case number, the date, where I collected it from, the victim's name, my name, and the investigator from the Wake County Sheriff's Department's name is on it.
And are those two items sealed and initialed by different, what you would know to be analysts that could be involved in this case?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, this time I would ask to introduce 239 and 240 into evidence.
And they are allowed.
And these were sent to the SBI for further processing, to your understanding.
Yes, sir.
And you mentioned a moment ago in talking about that form, the SBI 5 form that you sent to SBI, that the CCBI case number was 14-2067 and the Wake County Sheriff's Department number was 14-009962. Did those two numbers appear on that, all those items of evidence that we examined yesterday?
Yes, sir.
And those were part of the numbers, those numbers were how you helped identify all the items that we talked about yesterday?
Yes, sir.
If I may have just a moment, John.
Yes.
Other questions at this time? Cross-examination, Ms. Handler.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Good morning, Agent Louder.
Good morning.
So you were just saying that, so there was you noticed a spot of blood on the back porch, is that right? And you ended up not sending a sample of that to the SBI, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's because you felt like, well, your goal was to identify a suspect, is that right?
My goal was to submit evidence that could help forensically link a suspect to the victim.
Right, okay. And you felt that this drop of blood, since it could come either from Sylvester Taylor or Latanya Holden, but not from the defendant, that it wasn't important?
Like I said, we were never given an indication that the suspect was bleeding or injured at the time of the incident. So we were under the assumption that the blood, yes, belonged to either Latanya Taylor or Sylvester Taylor.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Latanya Holden.
Right, yes. So on April 14th, you returned to the scene, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was because you had been asked to go back and look for additional shell casings.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was because evidence that had been collected between the 10th and the 14th showed that there were likely more shell casings at the scene?
Based off of, I believe, the medical examiner's findings, it had been determined that there were more shots fired than what we were able to find that initial night.
And specifically, was that Sylvester Taylor's autopsy that led you to those conclusions?
I believe so, yes.
Were you asked to look for a specific number of shell casings?
No, we weren't asked to look for a specific number of shell casings.
And those shell casings are pretty small, right?
Yes.
It's a large area, potentially
Yes,
to
ma'am.
search.
Yes.
So your supervisor, Agent Jones, he used a metal detector, is that
Yes.
right? And he used that metal detector in the backyard
Yes.
and not in any other areas?
We mainly focused it in the backyard, so from the back of the house, right off of that rear porch, towards where we were able to locate the deceased.
Okay. You also searched the inside of the house, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And one of the items that you collected was, and this is going back to April 10th, one of the items you collected was a wallet.
Yes, ma'am.
And that wallet, that was not difficult to see, right?
No.
That was in plain view, sitting right there on top of a dresser, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. You may step down.
Yes, Your Honor. May I approach the stand?
Yes.
Your Honor, the next witness that we have is Miss Julianne McManus.
Ma'am, if you would, please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Waller?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. McManus, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Or Agent McManus, I should say. Good morning. Can you please state your name for the record?
Yes, it is Julianne McManus.
And Ms. McManus or Agent McManus, how are you employed, ma'am?
I am a forensic examiner assigned to the latent print unit within the Raleigh-Wake City County Bureau of Identification, or CCBI.
And you said you're a forensic examiner. Can you tell us a little bit about what a forensic examiner is?
Yes, sir. My main duties and responsibilities are to analyze, compare, and evaluate latent print impressions. I also run these latent print impressions through our local, state, and federal fingerprint databases. I potentially make identifications and exclusions. I prepare notes and reports and testify to these in court. I also run shoe print impressions through our shoe print database to try to determine potential make and models. And I also respond to the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner when requested by our Investigations Division to collect postmortem impressions.
Agent McManus, can you tell us a little bit about how your job is different than the job that Agent Lauder just described to us that she does?
Yes, sir. After the agents are done collecting any sort of latent evidence, they drop it into a secure locker within CCBI. Our forensic technicians have access to this locker. They will collect the latent evidence every morning that has come in from the 2 shifts before, and then they bring it up to the latent print unit. Any of the person's crimes, such as homicides, rapes, robberies, or sexual assaults, come to the latent print examiners, and any of the property crimes stay with the forensic technicians. At this point, the forensic technicians and the latent print examiners have the same type of job. We go through all of the lift cards within the envelopes to try to determine if there are any latent impressions of value to run through any of the fingerprint databases.
And you mentioned you have several different jobs in terms of looking at shoe impressions and fingerprint impressions. In this case, what type of analysis were you asked to perform?
Database searching as well as a latent print comparison.
For fingerprints?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Agent McManus, can you tell us a little bit about your training and experience regarding a comparison and identification regarding latent prints, specifically fingerprints.
Yes, sir. I received my Bachelor of Art in Forensic Science with a concentration in psychology from St. Andrews University in 2008. During my time in college, I was able to obtain an internship with the North Carolina State Crime Lab's latent print unit. During that time, I received about 400 hours worth of hands-on training and experience. Since being hired by CCBI, I have attended multiple formal classroom trainings as well as conferences, all totaling about 430 training hours. 330 of those are latent specific. Within CCBI, I took a 2-year training program, and also I am one of about 1,000 people in the world who are a certified latent print examiner through the International Association for Identification, or the IAI, which is the world's oldest and largest group of forensic professionals.
And Agent McManus, approximately how many comparisons have you done in regards to fingerprint cases while you've been at CCBI, approximately?
That would be a very hard number to say. I would say hundreds of thousands.
And out of those many thousands of cases, have you had the opportunity to make identifications?
Yes, sir.
And approximately how many identifications have you made?
Oh, I wouldn't even know how to give a number for that. I'm sorry.
In the thousands as
Yes,
well?
sir.
Okay. And have you testified as an expert in courtroom proceedings before?
Yes, sir. I've testified approximately 20 times. 17 of those have been in Wake County Superior Court, and 3 of those have been in federal court here in North Carolina.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to tender Agent McManus as an expert in latent print analysis.
Her testimony will be received as proffered.
Thank you. Now, Agent McManus, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this case?
Yes, sir. If I may refer to my notes, Your Honor.
Yes.
On April 10th of 2014, I received a latent envelope in this case. As I mentioned before, my first duty is to go through that latent envelope and determine if there are any latent print impressions of value to run through our fingerprint databases. The first database that I'm going to try to run fingerprints through is our local fingerprint database. At this time, when I went through the latent envelope and through the lift cards, I determined that there were not, in fact, any latent print impressions that were of value to run through the database.
And let me stop you right there, and if I may approach the clerk, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
May I approach?
Yes.
Agent McManus, I'm going to hand you what was introduced through Agent Louder yesterday, and she has Agent Thompson listed there. Thompson, Louder, the same person. Do you recognize 219 itself?
Yes, sir, I do.
What is State's Exhibit number 219?
State's Exhibit 219 is the latent envelope, which is CCBI item number 21.
And those would have been, and how do you know what the description is?
Exactly what do you...
Is there a description as to these being latent cards on there, or CCBI items?
Yes, sir. Agent Thompson, or Louder, had notated as item number 21. She has the CCBI and Wake County case numbers, as well as the offense, victim, address, officer, and as well as the number of lift cards contained within the envelope.
Sorry, that was a bad question on my part to start with. All right, 219, if you can open 219 and reveal the contents of that. What do you see in terms of the contents of 219?
There are 5 latent lift cards.
And when you say latent lift cards, what are latent lift cards?
Latent lift cards contain latent lifts that were lifted by the agents with tape. On the back, they also notate where it was lifted from. They provide a drawing with the general area of where they lifted it, as well as case information.
And I think before I went and retrieved those cards for you, you were talking about one of the first things you do is a local and state database search. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
But before you can even do that, do you examine these cards to tell whether or not they are sufficient quality to even do that database search?
Yes, sir.
And I think that's where I interrupted you, so if you can tell the members of the jury a little bit about that.
So I have my 5 lift cards. I'm going to use a magnifier and look at the impressions that are on each lift card and try to determine, are there any latent fingerprints or palm prints that are of value to run through the database. Our local fingerprint database requires that there are a minimum of 6 points of interest to be able to run it. I determined that all of the latent impressions that were contained within the 5 lift cards were not of value, so they did not meet that minimum requirement.
And Agent McManus, are there certain factors that can prevent a latent card or a latent print from having a value for you to run through the database search?
Yes, sir. One major factor can be texture. If a surface is very textured, the likelihood of a good latent print impression being left is very low. Latent print impressions are made up of about 99% water. So they're very fragile. If you touch a surface and then swipe over it, there's a chance that it could be destroyed or smudged. And so a lot of latent print impressions that we see are smudges because they are so fragile.
And can there also be characteristics about a person, him or herself, that affect one's ability to even leave a latent print on an object?
Yes, sir. Generally, the skin, if your skin is very dry, you're not going to leave behind impressions. If your skin is very wrinkled, you might leave behind distorted impressions. And also, if there's something in between the finger and a surface such as gloves, you're not going to leave an impression.
So if I put my thumbprint on this banister here in front of you, it's not a guarantee that there will even be a print able to be retrieved from that.
Correct. Latent print impressions are chance impressions. So when you touch a surface, there's always a chance you may or may not leave an impression behind.
So Agent McManus, once you saw the quality of the print cards that were lifted and determined that they were essentially of no value, you weren't able to even run those prints through a database search. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, later on in the course of this case, were you asked to do some specific identification procedures?
Yes, sir. Later on approximately April 23rd of 2014, I did a full case comparison. And what this means is I take the latent print impressions that are within the case and compare them to specific items of evidence. In this case, I compared the latent print impressions to the postmortem impressions collected by, I believe, Agent Snyder of A. Taylor and S. Taylor.
Let me interrupt you right there just briefly. I'm going to hand you State's Exhibit 210 and 211. Can you identify those two items of evidence for us?
Yes, sir. These are the postmortem impressions collected by Agent Snyder of the 2 victims, A. Taylor and S. Taylor. And I can recognize them by my markings, which are my initials and the date that I received the evidence.
And can you just, I think 210A, just if you can remove 210A from the envelope. You can remove all the context, but we'll use 210A as an example. 210A. Mm-hmm. What does that appear to be, ma'am?
Excuse me. 210A appears to be the postmortem impressions from the left hand of A. Taylor.
And how did you go about using her impressions and Sylvester Taylor's impressions and any other known impressions you may have used?
So during my analysis of the lift cards, I was able to determine that there was one latent print impression that was of value to still compare to somebody. Due to the textured surface of the lift, I was not able to run it through the database, but there was still information there that I was able to use to compare. I would have done a side-by-side comparison of the latent print impression to the postmortem impressions and perform my analysis and comparison.
And did you also look at the known impressions of the defendant in this case, Mr. Holden, as well?
Yes, sir. I also compared the latent print impressions to to a card bearing the name Nathan Lorenzo Holden.
And after you compared the postmortem prints of Sylvester Taylor and Anglia Taylor and the defendant Nathan Holden, were you able to make any identifications in this case?
No, sir, I was not.
Okay. And was there a reason why you weren't able to make any identifications?
Yes, sir. I determined that the latent print impression was an exclusion to the card bearing the name Nathan Lorenzo Holden. I determined that it was inconclusive, which means that there was not enough information in the knowns or the latent print impression to make an identification or an exclusion. So I had to determine that it was inconclusive to both of the victims, S. Taylor and A. Taylor, due to the poor quality of the postmortem impressions.
So CCBI went through the fingerprint process to the best that it could, but was not able to make an identification in this case.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Agent McManus. I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination. Thank you, ma'am. You may step down.
May I approach the witness stand?
Yes.
And Your Honor, may I approach the clerk?
Yes.
Wilson from the State Crime Lab.
Now, if you would, place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Lively.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. If you would, please introduce yourself to the jury, and if you'll tell us how you're employed.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Wilson, and I'm employed at the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory as a forensic scientist in the firearms unit.
And, Ms. Wilson, how long have you been employed by the State Crime Lab?
Approximately 5.5 years.
And can you tell me what your duties are there?
My primary responsibilities within the firearms unit is to examine firearms-related evidence, which could include things such as firearms and fired ammunition components like cartridge cases, shot shells, and bullets, with the primary objective being to determine whether those fired ammunition components were fired in a particular firearm or even within the same firearm. Additional types of analysis that we perform would be firearms function testing, as well as serial number restorations and distance determinations from gunshot residues. Upon doing my examinations, I then write reports and offer testimony on my findings.
Thank you. What kind of training and experience have you had to undergo to enable you to perform your duties at the crime lab?
I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry and a master's degree in forensic science. One of the courses I took during my master's degree was specifically a semester on firearms identification and the science behind it. Upon being hired at the North Carolina State Crime Lab, I completed an intensive in-house training program that lasted approximately 2 years and covered a number of topics, ranging from the history of firearms identification as well as the manufacturing of firearms, where I got to go to particular manufacturers and witness firsthand exactly how the firearms are manufactured and how the detail that I use in an identification is imparted onto that firearm. Other units of study would be microscopic comparisons, class characteristics, and individual characteristics, which are the types of things that I'm examining in order to conclude an identification, elimination, or inconclusive. Other units also include serial number restorations, distance determinations, internal, exterior, and interior ballistics, as well as ammunition, understanding the different types of ammunition and the different parts of the ammunition.
Thank you. And do you have to sort of undergo continuing training and education and keep up to date on these matters?
Yes, I complete continuing training, whether that's through attending conferences or participating in other courses such as armorers courses, which are a hands-on experience with a particular firearm in understanding the function and the safety features of that firearm. I also am proficiency tested annually, and so this is a case that is treated like a real case, but it's done to test whether I am proficient in my field.
I see. And can you tell me about how many times or how many comparisons you've been able to do in your 5.5 years at the crime lab?
Easily thousands.
Okay. And have you had occasion to testify in Superior Court in this state as an expert in forensic firearm identification and examination?
Yes, I have.
All right. About how many times have you testified as an expert in that field?
Approximately 15 times prior to today.
And those are in North Carolina Superior Courtrooms?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And would that be in Wake County and other counties as well?
This is my first time in Wake County, but yes, counties throughout the state.
Yes, ma'am. And where is your office actually located?
I'm currently located in the Asheville Laboratory, which is the Western Laboratory. I transferred to the Western Laboratory in August of 2016. Prior to that, I was working out of the Raleigh Laboratory.
Your Honor, at this time, we would tender Ms. Wilson as an expert in forensic firearms identification and examination.
No objection.
Her testimony will be received as proffered.
Ms. Wilson, can you tell us a little bit about the science of firearm identification?
So identifications are possible because of the manufacturing of the firearms, the way in which they're manufactured. The tools used to manufacture the firearms are much harder than the surface of the firearm itself. So those tools are used to mold and shape those working surfaces of the firearm. But as the tools are used, they will impart detail onto the firearm that is unique to that particular firearm. And the way they do that is because the tools themselves begin to dull over time, such that they cannot mark two firearms the exact same way. Think of a piece of sandpaper and two blocks of wood. If you rub the sandpaper over the first block of wood and then rub it over the second block of wood, those two pieces of wood are not going to have the same markings on a microscopic level because, as you know, the sandpaper is going to dull over time. It's the same concept with the tools used to manufacture the firearms. Those individual characteristics, as they're called, those unique qualities of the firearm, are then imparted onto ammunition that is fired within the firearm. So that detail is copied onto bullets fired from the firearm, or also copied onto parts of cartridge cases or shot shells that are fired in a particular firearm. By looking at those details and comparing those details, an identification, elimination, or inconclusive can be determined.
And can you explain to the jury a little bit about how you conduct your examination and your comparison, particularly of projectiles that may have been fired from the same firearm?
So all of my examinations are done microscopically through the use of a comparison microscope. This is a microscope that has a single eyepiece but two separate stages, such that two items can be viewed simultaneously as if they are side by side. I will, with both projectiles and with cartridge cases, I look first at class characteristics. These are characteristics that are determined by the manufacturer prior to manufacturing. So with the example of bullets, this would be the determination by the manufacturer to decide what kind of caliber firearm they're going to manufacture. It also includes the number of lands and grooves, which are the raised and lowered portions inside the barrel, and whether they're going to twist to the right or the left. These are examples of class characteristics of bullets. Class characteristics of cartridge cases would include things like the shape of the firing pin, as well as the manufacturing process of the breech face, which is going to leave breech face impression marks. If all the class characteristics agree between two items, then I begin to look at individual characteristics. These are those unique characteristics to a particular firearm that must be reproducible in order to qualify as individual characteristics. If there is a sufficient quality and quantity of agreement within these characteristics, then I conclude an identification. If there is disagreement of these individual characteristics, then it's an elimination. And if no decision can be made either way, then that would be an inconclusive. If the class characteristics do not agree, then that's an automatic elimination.
Okay. Now, how do you come to receive evidence for analysis in this case? Are you actively involved in the investigation of a crime, or is it just submitted to you by various law enforcement agencies?
Evidence comes into the laboratory from the law enforcement agencies. It comes through the evidence control unit, where it is assigned a case number for the laboratory as well as item numbers. Generally speaking, examiners at the crime laboratory are rarely involved in the actual examination of the scene, except in special circumstances when they're called out for assistance.
And so, you, other than maybe a brief synopsis of the facts of the case, you're not really aware of the details of the case or other evidence in the case. You're simply performing an analysis of the functionality of the firearm and potentially a comparison of the ballistics.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach with items that have already been entered into evidence states 83, 84, and 83A?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson, I've placed in front of you what's marked as states 83, this box, 83A, and states exhibit 84. Do you recognize these items?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and what do you recognize them to be?
I recognize them to be the high point caliber .380 auto semi-automatic pistol that I examined in this case, as well as a magazine and 4 Winchester caliber .380 auto cartridges.
All right. And when were those items submitted to you and by whom?
These items were submitted on the 13th of May, 2014. And the submitting officer is listed as Anita Smith, who is an employee of CCBI.
All right. And so you know Anita Smith as being an employee of CCBI who actually submitted these items to you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now you don't. Now you've probably seen lots of high point 380 firearms in your time. Is that right?
That's correct.
How do you specifically recognize this as the firearm that was submitted to you for analysis in this case?
It contains engravings underneath the trigger guard of the case number, the item designation that I gave to this firearm, which is K1, K representing known, as well as my initials. It also has a zip tie placed through the magazine well, which also bears these same markings, and that zip tie is added at the conclusion of my examination just to show that the firearm is in a safe and unloaded condition.
All right. And it also contains a crime lab number, is that correct?
Yes, it has the case number.
Okay. And that's the same case number that's associated with your report, is that right?
That's correct.
So you're able to confirm that that is the firearm that you tested back, I guess, over a period of time between May 13th and maybe May 20th?
That's correct.
Okay. And 83A, I believe, is a bag. Do you recognize the bag? Is that how it came packaged to you when you first received it?
I received it within the box. It was no longer secured into the bag
But
when I received
the
it.
bag was contained in the box when it came to you?
That's correct.
All right. And you notice your own markings both on the box and again on the zip tie of the firearm?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. And you do that to sort of maintain the integrity of the firearm and its chain of custody and things of that nature?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, could you walk us through, the testing you do on the firearm when you receive it?
When I initially receive a firearm, any firearm we receive within the firearms section goes through a function test. First, that would include just a visual inspection of the firearm, looking for any damaged or missing pieces. It would also include a test of any safety features that are present to determine whether they are functioning or not. I also determine the trigger pull weight, which is a range given in pounds. The lower weight of the range is the amount of weight that can be applied to the trigger such that the firearm will not fire. And the upper level of the range is the weight that can be applied to the trigger such that the firearm will reliably fire. I will then test fire the firearm using ammunition that we have within the reference collection at the laboratory. It is test fired into a water tank such that the most pristine samples can be acquired for any future comparison purposes. As well, test firing serves as another level of function testing, showing that the firearm is capable of firing.
Now, when you say it's test fired into a water tank for pristine samples, is that in regards to maybe the markings that the firearm might impart onto the ballistics? Is that why you do that?
Yes, the bullets, that way they don't become deformed, which could potentially inhibit the viewing of the areas where the markings would be imparted from the firearm.
And so your test fires are sort of your control group. You know that these have been fired from the firearm, see the representative markings, and then use those to analyze against other casings, jackets, or bullets that might be submitted to you.
Yes, these would be considered standards.
All right. What number were we on?
246
was the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Your Honor, I have what I'm marking State's Exhibit 247, and I asked to approve.
Yes, sir.
Wilson, I'm handing what's marked State's Exhibit 247. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
This is the envelope containing the test fires that I created in this case, and it bears the case number as well as my initials and other identifiers pertaining to the firearm.
Great. Would you mind checking that envelope and examining its contents? All right, and what is contained in that envelope?
Contained within this envelope are 3 fired cartridge cases and 3 fired bullets, all which contain my engravings with the case number, the item designation, which would be T1 through T3, T standing for test, as well as my initials.
And so do you recognize those to be the testifiers that you actually did during your function test of this weapon?
Yes, I do.
All right. And do they seem to be in the same condition as they were when you packaged them into evidence?
Yes.
Your Honor, we'd ask to move States 247 into evidence at this time.
It's allowed.
Also, I'd like for you to take a look at States Exhibit 84, which has already been entered into evidence. You identify that for us as well.
Yes, State's Exhibit 84 I found to be 1 magazine and 4 Winchester caliber .380 auto cartridges.
And would you examine the contents of States 84? Matt Pritch.
Yes.
Sarah, do you have a third one?
Do you recognize what's contained, what was contained in this envelope?
Yes, I do.
And can you identify for the jury what you see there?
I have a magazine that has my engravings with the laboratory case number, as well as the item designation, K2, and my initials. I have 3 Winchester .380 auto cartridges and a 4th Winchester .380 auto cartridge that I had placed in a separate bag labeled K2A with my initials.
Thank you. Let's talk about the function test of this particular high-point firearm. Can you take us through what you did in analyzing it, testing its functionality, things of that nature?
So being that this is a high-point firearm, it is manufactured with a magazine safety, a manual safety, and internal safety. These safeties are all checked to see if they're functioning properly. For example, with the magazine safety, the firearm would be cocked and prepared for firing, but the magazine would not be inserted and the trigger would be pulled to see if the firearm is capable of firing without the magazine present. Because of the manufacturing with a magazine safety, this firearm should not discharge if the magazine is not properly in place. I would then insert the magazine into the magazine well and again dry fire the firearm, which means pulling the trigger without any ammunition loaded. And in that case, the firearm should discharge, which it did in this case. I also test the other safety features in a similar manner by turning them on or off, such as the manual safety, to make sure that it is not firing when it is supposed to and also able to fire when it is supposed to.
Can you tell me where that manual safety feature is on the high point?
The manual safety feature is located on the left side of the frame close to the slide.
Is it visible to you now?
No, it is not.
Okay. You'd have to remove it from the box in order to show that feature?
That's correct.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd ask for permission for Ms. Wilson to remove the firearm from the box so she can present that feature to the jury.
That'll be fine. And can you confirm, ma'am, that the firearm is still in the safe state before you remove it?
Yes, it is.
All right, and removing it will not render it in a non-safe state, is that correct?
No, the remaining zip tie can remain secured in it. I just need to cut the zip tie that's securing the firearm to the box itself.
That'll be fine.
Matt Fresh.
Yes, sir.
And as you're cutting that, Ms. Wilson, there is another zip tie, black zip tie contained in this box. Do you recognize that as well?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
I noted that I received this firearm with a black zip tie and that I removed a black zip tie as well as a beige evidence tag from the firearm before examination.
And those are both contained in this box, 83, excuse me.
Yes, it's our practice that they just be returned with maintained with the firearm.
Yes, ma'am. And again, you removed a zip tie from around the barrel and the trigger area, but there's another zip tie in place that renders this inoperable. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And in your opinion, it would not be able to fire at this time in the state?
That's correct.
would you mind just picking up the high point? If you can maybe step down and show the jury where the safety feature is that you checked during your functions test.
The manual safety is located here on the left side of the slide. It is currently in the lowered position, which means it is off, so the firearm would be capable of firing if it was loaded and the magazine was in place. In order to turn the safety feature on, the slide would be forward and it would be raised up and fit into the notch here right next to the red dot, which would turn the safety feature on, meaning that the firearm would not be capable of firing.
Thank you, ma'am. And so in your initial analysis of this high point firearm, you found that all the safety features were working properly.
That's correct.
And did you notice any damage or missing parts to the firearm?
No, I did not.
Tell me what you do next in your examination or functions testing.
The next step would be the trigger pull weight determination, like I described earlier. This is done through a set of static weights. These are the ones we use in the laboratory are circular discs of a standardized weight, and they have either holes or screws on them so that they can be attached to a post. The post has a hook at the top, and that hook can be placed through the trigger and laid onto the trigger, and then the firearm is lifted such that the barrel is perpendicular to the table. So in an upward motion with, imagine the barrel pointed upwards while the weight is held on by the hook, and then weight is either increased or decreased until the range can be determined. Again, the range is such that the lowest amount of the range it will not fire, and then at the higher amount they will reliably fire. It is tested at each of these levels at least 3 times.
And what were your findings with regard to the trigger weight?
I found that this firearm has a single action trigger pull greater than 6 pounds, but less than or equal to 7 pounds. Single action simply refers to the function of the trigger, meaning that pulling the trigger performs one function, which is firing of the firearm, as opposed to double action, where pulling the trigger would both cock and fire the firearm.
All right. And when you're doing, when you're testing for trigger pull weight, is this the dry firing you're talking about, or you're actually firing projectiles?
No, this is done with dry firing, except in the case of rim fires.
All right.
Rim fires?
And you said that it was tested with the 6 pound weight and the 7 pound weight at least 3 times each?
Yes, it was likely tested at multiple weights, but that is ultimately the range, and so it would be verified 3 times at the lower weight and 3 times at the upper weight as well.
And so at 6 pounds, that was sort of the minimum weight at which it would fire?
6 pounds is the weight that it would not fire.
It would not fire at 6 pounds, but it would reliably fire at 7 pounds of pressure or weight.
That's correct.
All right. Can you tell me what you did next?
Next would be to examine any other evidence submitted in the case to just determine what type of evidence I have. I'm looking for materials, particularly like whether the bullets in the case have a brass jacket or copper jacket, or whether they're lead. I would also look at any cartridge cases to determine whether the primers were comprised of nickel or brass. And that's simply so that when I do test fire this firearm, I'm test firing with something that is as similar as possible to the evidence to aid in any future comparison.
And is that because different metals or surfaces might be impacted differently by the same tool or firearm?
It's possible if the firearm may reproduce details better on one surface or another, although generally speaking there's sufficient detail on any type, but it is practice that I will shoot something that is as close as possible to the type of evidence that I have.
Okay, so before you do your test firing, you actually look at the other items that are submitted for comparison, is that right?
Yes, I will open the items and begin to catalog them in the worksheets, noting the caliber of the bullets and noting, for example, just the type of detail that is present. Some of those class characteristics that I described earlier can already be readily identified by just a visual examination of the evidence. So that would help me determine whether a comparison was going to be necessary or not.
And let's talk about some of the class characteristics of this particular firearm. What did you know about the class characteristics for this firearm?
This high-point firearm has a hemispherical firing pin, which means it's going to leave a round firing pin impression on any fired cartridge cases. It also has rifling, which I spoke of earlier, those lands and grooves of 9 left, meaning it has 9 lands and 9 grooves, and they twist to the left direction. I also measured the widths of the lands and the grooves by measuring the test-fired bullets that I fire within this firearm. I'll measure those impression widths, and those are also class characteristics.
Thank you. And the lands and grooves, they're essentially grooves that are inside the barrel of the firearm. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And do different manufacturers have, their own signature lands and grooves, or what are you able to tell by looking at that?
There are some general numbers. For example, 6 lands and grooves with a twist to the right is widely used throughout the firearms manufacturers, although High Point is known for using distinctive numbers of lands and grooves and twist, generally using 9 left, 7 left, even 3 left. These are not commonly used by any other known firearms manufacturer that I'm aware of.
Right. Your Honor, I'd like to approach with a number of items. This is states 205, 203, 202, 204, 152, 153, 228, 229, 206, 226, 227, and 241.
Yes, sir.
Do you have your report in front of you?
Oh, yes, I do.
All right. So, in sort of organizing your report, you number each item yourself with your crime lab number. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, but then you have to cross-reference it with the CCBI number. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and now we've added state's exhibit numbers. So I've put these in order for you, but if you would, just examine these envelopes that you found, and once you're ready to identify each of them, then we'll talk about them in turn. Have you had a chance to examine all the envelopes I've placed in front of you?
Yes, I have.
All right. Let's go through them then and identify them. Now, first of all, you have labeled, I think, states 83 as K1. Is that right in your report?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so your K1 is the pistol,
That's correct.
and then K2, your K2 is the magazine and the 3 Winchester 380 auto cartridges.
Yes.
All right. What is item K3? Your item K3.
K3 is 1 Winchester caliber 380 auto cartridge.
And would you open that that envelope and see if that is actually the 380 auto cartridge that you examined?
Yes, it is.
And it appears to be in the same condition as when you did your analysis.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And then you have items Q1 through Q11, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, Q1 through Q7 all appear to be the same type of evidence. Can you tell us what each one of those Q1 through 7 contains?
They're each 1 Winchester caliber 380 auto fired cartridge cases.
And a fired cartridge case is different from a cartridge in that what?
A cartridge is a single unit of ammunition. It is the whole ammunition, the unfired round. It contains the cartridge case, the primer, as well as the propellant or gunpowder and a projectile.
And so a cartridge is basically the whole bullet, right?
That's correct.
How a layperson might refer to it.
That's correct.
Whereas a cartridge case we might refer to as a shell casing.
That's correct.
Okay, so item K3 is a whole bullet, or I'm sorry for saying it that way.
It's a whole round, yes.
Yeah, a whole round. All right, and then Q1 through Q7 are all shell casings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, then we have a separate group, Q8, Q9, Q10, and Q11. And can you tell us what sorts of items those are?
I determined those each to be caliber 380 auto fired copper jacketed bullets.
And so these are the projectiles that have left the shell casing then?
That's correct.
They're fired bullets.
That's correct.
Okay. And then you also have one marked K2A. Can you find that and identify that for us as well?
Yes.
Okay. And what's that?
This is also a Winchester caliber 380 auto cartridge.
Now, your K2A, it says, on your report it says your item 30, which means the CCBI item 30, correct?
Yes.
And so that was found in the same item of evidence as the magazine and the 3 Winchester 380 cartridges, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, first of all, let's talk about your analysis of Q1 through Q7, the cartridge cases. Can you tell us about how you examined them and compared them to your standards and what your results were?
First, I would microscopically compare the test-fired cartridge cases to one another, looking for that reproducing detail. That's important to see how the firearm is reproducing before comparing it to any unknowns or cues, questioned items. And so first I compared T1 through T3 to one another, looking for where that replicating detail was present, if it was present. And after I determined that there was replicating detail there and it was suitable for comparison purposes, I then compared it to each of the Q1 through Q7 fired cartridge cases that I received in this case. And I compared it based off of the breech face impression detail. So this is the detail that is imparted onto the primer of the cartridge case during the firing process. The breech face is sort of the rear that supports the cartridge inside the chamber of the gun as it's being fired. And so as the pressures build up, that cartridge case is pushed back against that surface, and the softer area of the primer can take on the detail. It gets copied onto the primer of the cartridge case. So that was the area that I was examining in this case, and I concluded that the Q1 through Q7 cartridge cases were fired in the K1 firearm.
Now, T1 through T3, those are your test fires, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so you fired all three of those rounds, found that that the markings were replicating in all three?
That's correct.
All right, and then we're able to analyze Q1 through Q7 against those T1 through T3.
That's correct.
And it's your conclusion and opinion that Q1 through Q7 were all fired from the same firearm, that being the 380 Winchester, or I'm sorry, the 380 High Point.
That's correct.
All right. Now, next, let's talk about Q8, Q9, Q10, and 11. These are fired copper-jacketed bullets. Tell us how you're able to examine those items against the test fires.
It's a very similar process where first I look at the test-fired bullets, generally looking at the land impressions and the detail within the land impressions. On bullets, this detail appears as like fine and gross lines called striations, and I will visually and microscopically compare the test-fired bullets to one another, first finding the proper alignment, meaning that the land impression of one matches up to the land impression of the other, and then in spinning the bullets, all of the subsequent land impressions agree. And then I will look at, again, what detail is replicating and whether there is sufficient quality or quantity of detail for comparison. I then will select one of those for comparison to any evidence bullets in the case and go through a similar procedure of first aligning the bullets to one another and then looking to see if there is sufficient agreement there for an identification or inconclusive.
And did you find a sufficient quantity and quality of markings to come to an opinion about Q8, Q9, Q10, and Q11?
Yes, I was.
And what was your opinion?
My opinion is that the Q8 through Q11 bullets were fired from the K1 firearm.
Now, may I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
A couple of items that I want to talk to you about specifically. That would be K2A and K3. Do you have both of those in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. K2A and K3 are cartridges. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Did you do any analysis on them or attempt to do any sort of comparison of those two items?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what were you able to find or discern from doing that?
In doing my general observations when opening these items, I noted that both K2A, which I separated out from the magazine and the other cartridges, contained a firing pin impression. As well, the K3 cartridge was observed to have a firing pin impression, which means that at some point a firing pin impacted that primer and there may be detail suitable for comparison purposes between that unfired round to a particular firearm.
What causes the firing pin to impact the back of the cartridge?
In order for the firing pin to impact the cartridge, the trigger would need to be pulled.
And so, would the trigger need to be pulled with up to 7 pounds of pressure in order to do that, to make that impression?
Yes, the trigger pull weight is not going to vary.
All right. So you're able to say from seeing that impression that the trigger was pulled, and that the cartridge was, I guess, marked upon it in the chamber.
Yes.
All But neither of these fired, is that right?
That's correct.
Let's see. K2A was the cartridge that was submitted along with the 3 Winchester 380 caliber cartridges and the magazine. And I believe that states 84, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so the other 3 cartridges in states 84 didn't have any sort of pin mark on them or any tool mark, is that correct?
That's correct.
But 2A did, which indicates that the trigger was pulled and that some impression was made on it.
That's correct.
And so, why wouldn't it have fired? I mean, you've already testified that the gun was functioning properly.
There could be a number of reasons why it would not fire. For one, it could just be a faulty round of ammunition. There could also be some temporary issues either with the function of the firearm or with the way that the firearm is being used.
And you'd call that kind of user error?
Yes.
What sort of user error might contribute to the cartridge not firing?
The firearm could be what's called out of battery, meaning that it's not fully closed in the locked position such that it can be fired. The firing pin could still impact this primer area, but if the battery is not closed all the way, the action is not closed, then that may not produce enough force from the firing pin to allow the primer to detonate and to fire the round. The issue with out of battery can happen for multiple reasons. It could be from the recoil spring being weak. That's the spring that controls the rearward and forward motion of the slide, which occurs after a round is fired. The energy that it produces sends the slide rearward, which allows it to be ejected from the firearm, and that return forward motion of the slide is what loads the next round. But if some of the energy is not properly imparted, then the slide may only come most of the way forward, which would create a situation where it's out of battery. The slide could have been snagged on something that would prevent it from coming all the way forward. The springs could potentially be dirty, although I did not note any function issues when I test fired the firearm myself. But any of those, as well as numerous other possibilities, could affect whether that the action was fully closed at the time that the trigger was pulled.
And what things could the operator do that might contribute to the cartridge not firing properly?
It's possible that I see it imparted onto their hand as opposed to maintained within the recoil spring.
And again, you had done your functions test, and the firearm itself seemed to be properly functioning in every way. Is that correct?
I noted no issues when I was test firing the firearm. If it were, in general, a weakened recoil spring, generally you would see characteristics such as stovepiping, which is the term used when a fired cartridge case, doesn't fully eject from the firearm because the slide returns forward too fast because it doesn't come all the way back and then go forward. That causes the cartridge case to be stuck out of the ejection port, making it look like a stovepipe.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Now let's see, you've also got CCBI item 16, which is your item, I believe this is your K3, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And this is State's Exhibit 205. Now, in examining that, can you talk to us a little bit about what markings you observed on that and how they possibly could have been made?
On this particular one, I observed multiple extractor and ejector marks indicating that it had been cycled through a firearm multiple times. I also observed a very light firing pin impression as well as some other dents on the primer surface, As well, this cartridge has a deep indention within the case wall, meaning that the side of the cartridge case, and though that would be indicative of something like a misfeed.
Okay, what's a misfeed?
A misfeed is when a round is not properly loaded into the chamber, where it becomes snagged.
And what could cause that?
It could be caused with some kind of misalignment, whether it wasn't properly loaded into the magazine to begin with. These markings could have even been caused during the extraction or ejection time.
Okay, but it's your opinion and based on your examination that the firing pin made contact with that cartridge as well.
Yes, it did.
And would the cartridge have been extracted from the gun after the firing, or?
Because this cartridge did not actually fire, it would not be automatically cycled out of the firearm. The user would have to pull the slide rearward in order to clear that unfired round out of the chamber.
All right. Now you attempted to also examine and compare K2A and K3 with the test cartridge cases from the firearm. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what were you able to say about K2A and K3?
I found that there was agreement of all discernible class characteristics and some agreement of individual characteristics between K2A and K3 cartridges, as well as the test cartridge cases that I fired in the K1 firearm. However, the agreement is insufficient to identify K2A and K3 from having been attempted to be fired in the K1 firearm.
So they have the same class characteristics, but you're not able to say of the individual characteristics. Is that correct?
I found some agreement of individual characteristics, but it did not meet the threshold for identification.
All right, I see. There wasn't a sufficient quantity and quality of those impressions, but you didn't rule it out or say that they were not fired from the K1 firearm. Is that correct?
That's correct.
It's simply insufficient.
That's correct.
Okay. And is there anything else you do in your analysis?
The only other thing that I would do is determine the magazine capacity.
Right. And again, if you could hold up the magazine for the jurors and just explain for them what the magazine does.
This is the magazine. The cartridges are loaded here into the magazine. What's called the follower gets pushed down. It's spring-loaded so that as the rounds are loaded into the firearm, the next round is raised up to become available. This is inserted through the magazine well of the firearm. And in this particular firearm, with the presence of the magazine safety, it'll also disable that safety such that the firearm can be fired.
And so that magazine basically goes up through the handle of the firearm. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that's where, and then I guess at the top of the magazine is where the chamber's located.
That's correct.
Okay. And so a bullet has to be cycled into the chamber before it can be fired. Is that right?
That's correct.
And how does it get from the magazine into the chamber?
It can move from the magazine into the chamber by pulling the slide rearward and releasing it forward. But I will note that you can also manually place a cartridge directly within the chamber through the ejection port.
All right. And the ejection port, that's that hole in the side the zip ties through, correct?
That's correct.
So after you fire the cartridge, it shoots out or ejects, the casing does.
That's correct.
While the bullet or the projectile goes out the front, the casing comes out the side.
That's correct.
Okay. And that's different from a revolver. This is a semi-automatic revolver. The casings would stay within their individual chambers that revolve around through the barrel.
That's correct.
Okay. What did you determine the capacity of this magazine to be?
I determined that the magazine capacity was 8 rounds.
8 rounds, okay. And how many fired cartridge cases were presented to you to analyze? I guess Q1 through Q7.
I received 7 fired cartridge cases in total.
And how many, I guess, other cartridges were submitted to you?
5 other cartridges were submitted to me.
So you had, and then there were 4 fired copper jacketed bullets, which may have previously been connected to the cartridge cases, right?
That's possible.
Okay. All right, and again, the capacity of this magazine is 8, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, if it had 8 in the magazine, could you then put another one in the chamber?
That's correct.
Okay, so it really could hold 9 if you filled the magazine and then loaded the chamber directly?
That's correct.
But you're given 12 cartridges or cartridge cases to analyze.
That's correct.
After your analysis is done, what do you do with the items that are presented to you?
I also entered the test fire cartridge case into IBIS, which is the Integrated Ballistics Identification System. This is the system that we use. It's similar to APHIS or CODIS for DNA or for fingerprints, where it's a database that can search against any other crimes to potentially form linkages that may not have been readily apparent. But at the conclusion of my examination, my microscopic work is examined by a reviewer who comes to their own separate conclusion. If there is agreement between myself and the reviewer, then the case is released, repackaged, and transferred to the evidence control unit for dissemination back to the submitting agency.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't have anything further.
Cross-examination.
Your Honor, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
So K1 is the gun, correct?
That's correct.
And it came to you in a box with a magazine, and the magazine is labeled K2, is that right?
The magazine is labeled K2, that's correct.
And the magazine was in a package that also contained 4 rounds, is that right?
That's correct.
And were those actually in the magazine? Or they're in a package with the magazine?
My notes indicate that they were in the package with the magazine.
And those 4 rounds, was there anything distinguishing any of them from the others before you tested them?
The only distinguishing was the one that appeared to have a light firing pin impression.
Right, but when you received those, the one with the light firing pin strike wasn't in a separate bag. It wasn't, all 4 of them were mixed in together when you received them, right?
That's correct.
Okay, that's the only questions I have. Thank you.
Redirect.
Just for our edification, what does K and Q stand for?
K stands for known. That would be ascribed to a firearm, a magazine, or unfired rounds. Q stands for questioned. That would be fired bullets, fired cartridge cases, fired shell casings, and then T stands for test, referring to the test fires.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Nothing further.
Anything further, Ms. Hamburger? All right, thank you, ma'am. You may step down. We'll go ahead and break at this time until 11:45. So ladies and gentlemen, please recall all the rules and instructions I've given you throughout this trial. Please leave your notepads in the chair. Gather in the deliberation room at 11:45. Everyone else, please remain seated.